that contained cell bodies, fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system. Some of them, most of them also contained voluntary motor neurons or sensory neurons. So this is just one component of these cranial nerves. So we're going to start out with cranial nerve 3. Remember, it has general somatic efferent going to the medial rectus and the inferior oblique and the superior rectus and so on. But that's not what we're looking at. This is coming out of the brainstem. So from the midbrain, in the ocular motor nuclei, it's called a nucleus because it's inside the central nervous system. We have our preganglionic neuron. And it's passing through the superior orbital fissure with all the rest of the fibers of the ganglia. So this image that we use for the cranial nerve, so here's our ocular motor nerve, and it's sending regular motor fibers to the superior rectus, but it also contains preganglionic fibers that are going to the smooth muscle inside the eye. They stop and synapse with postganglionic neurons in a small, flat, these are not round, these are kind of flat structures. And the postganglionic neuron is going to go into the eyeball, and it's going to synapse with the ciliary muscle. And we would have neurons synapsing with the iris, the constrictor muscle of the iris. So this ganglion has a name, for those who was asking if they all have names. This one does, and it's called the ciliary ganglion. The neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, and the neurotransmitter here is also acetylcholine. Okay. So if you took eye drops that were cholinergic blockers, would you have a constricted pupil or a dilated pupil?
Dilated.
Dilated, all right, because it would block acetylcholine from constricting those muscles. You could also dilate the pupil by taking drugs that would activate the sympathetic receptors on the muscles innervated by the sympathetic nervous system. So we can get effects by blocking one of the two systems and activating the other. Okay? Kind of, it varies on some of the side effects that are involved. Now, the postganglionic neuron, or ocular motor and facial and glossopharyngeal, actually travel with branches of the trigeminal nerve. And so the ganglion actually is suspended from the trigeminal nerve. I'm not going to draw this for all of them, but just to illustrate, you don't have to redraw yours. But just to illustrate, here would be trigeminal nerve, and it's going to be carrying sensory neurons from the eyeball. So let me draw those in. So just observe, I'm just kind of illustrating a principle here. So say from the cornea, we would have our sensory. It's going to come down farther because I have this way up too high. So this is trigeminal nerve. And so what happens is these postganglionic neurons actually do this. So they travel with the trigeminal nerve. So when you see the ganglion, you'll see it hanging from other nerves. The trigeminal nerve is not an autonomic nerve. This is just piggybacking with it. All right? So, I don't know if it made any sense, but an illustration that came to my mind this morning was Angelina Jolie's movie Salt, where she's trying to get away and she jumps off the bridge and lands on a truck. So she's piggybacking on that truck, okay? She's not part of the truck's cargo. She's not inside the truck. So these are not part of the trigeminal nerve. They're just traveling with it. But when we cut that trigeminal nerve, we end up cutting those autonomic fibers as well, okay? So it's just a curious type of thing that these nerve fibers actually get to their destination with different branches of the trigeminal nerve. All right, so ocular motor, preganglionic neurons are part of the ocular motor nuclei. Postganglionic cell bodies form the ciliary ganglion. Notice it's outside the organ. This ganglion is not inside the eyeball, and so we give it a name. All right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to see it. So it would be this ganglion that you see right here belongs to the facial nerve. Okay? So we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. It's also piggybacking on trigeminal, coming in through there. All right, so now let's look at the facial. Facial has two types of glands, two locations of glands that it innervates. One is the lacrimal, and the other, the submandibular and sublingual salivary. So we'll move this a little bit lower in our brainstem. Facial is down at between the pons and medulla. Here our sympathetic ganglion. He's going to synapse with postganglionic fibers. These postganglionic fibers are going to go to the lacrimal gland. Neurotransmitter is still acetylcholine. And this ganglion to the lacrimal gland is located here. So this is the pterygoid plate of the sphenoid bone. And so it's identified as either the pterygopalatine or the sphenopalatine. I don't care which one you use, because the pterygoid plate is a process of the sphenoid bone. Okay, so and that's associated with lacrimal gland. Then we have the submandibular gland, even though it's going to both submandibular and, I don't know if you can see it, it's down here, just by the tongue, on the side under the tongue, going to the submandibular components. And so that's a different ganglion. So we have the salivary glands, submandibular, and sublingual. Again, acetylcholine. Now, if someone is having their eyes examined and they put drops in their eyes that block acetylcholine from binding to its receptor in the eye, you get a dilated pupil. That probably won't have much of an effect on the salivary glands, okay? It could cause the eyes to feel dry, though, because some of those drops could get to the same molecules that bind acetylcholine for the lacrimal gland. Same molecule, still acetylcholine. Okay? So you're more likely to have a dry eye as a result of having your pupils dilated than you are to have a dry mouth. It's just not going to circulate through quite as much. Now, if you swallow a drug, you take an oral drug, okay, that blocks acetylcholine, then you would be more likely to have a systemic effect from it. All right, so pterygopalatine ganglion, and then this one is the submandibular ganglion. And both of these, again, the postganglionic fiber is going to travel with a branch of the sensory trigeminal nerves, although not considered to become a part of that nerve. And then we'll get to 9. And 9 is the glossopharyngeal nerve, and its ganglion is called the otic ganglion for the parotid gland. Otic meaning ear again. And we'll just change the name. All the diagrams will remain the same. So the effect of the parasympathetic system, acetylcholine, on our salivary glands is to increase secretion. So the parotid gland makes a watery solution that has enzymes that start the breakdown of polysaccharides. Submandibular and submucous is more of a thicker solution, more mucousy, that we talked about, helps to bind the food together while you're chewing it. So if you're going to have surgery in which you're unconscious and you're going to have an anesthetist in there taking control of your breathing, they often give you a drug that causes your salivary glands to stop secreting saliva. All right? Again, it could be a drug that blocks the acetylcholine molecules, or it could be a sympathetic one. And usually for the parotid gland, rather than stopping it, it actually functions most often to constrict the blood vessels. Sympathetic causes constriction with increased levels, and therefore less blood goes to the gland, and less fluid is available to be secreted from the gland, so your mouth is dry. So that's a more common effect than actually just working directly on the secretory cells. It works indirectly on the smooth muscle of the blood vessel. So now let's say I grew up on a college campus, a large college campus, a little bit, maybe twice the size of this one, and this one's relatively large. And our house was on the campus. And on the opposite end was a bakery, and every Friday afternoon they made cinnamon rolls. And my sisters and I would walk over there and buy a box of cinnamon rolls for Friday night supper. So on my way home to Elk Grove, there's a bakery along 99, and smelling cinnamon rolls, smelling bread, makes your mouth water. So when we talk about activation of this preganglionic neuron, all right, olfactory stimuli going into the temporal lobe will have connections via the diffuse fibers, pathways to the limbic system. Smells can change your emotions as well. And so from the limbic system, as well as directly from olfactory processing areas, we can get activation of these preganglionic cell bodies. Again, the tracts are not well defined or even named, some of them, but that's where that incoming control would be. That upper motor neuron would be coming in as reflexes from those areas. The Pavlovian reflex, where you ring a bell, okay, the auditory sound then is also connected in through those same pathways. All right, so that's the last of our named ganglia for the parasympathetic chain. Our fourth cranial nerve that has parasympathetic fibers is vagus. So I've eliminated these three. Vagus coming out of the medulla. These are very long preganglionic fibers. Okay. And they are going to travel into the organ, and their ganglia are going to actually be in the wall of the organ, in the muscle of the organ, or next to the cell lining. So we're talking about the stomach. Makes the muscle cells contract. It also makes the epithelial cells lining the glands secrete more hydrochloric acid or more enzymes. Goes to the pancreas to make the pancreas secrete insulin. All right, so those postganglionic cells are going to actually be within the wall of the organ. So let's put that one up here. And we'll do pelvic, and then we'll have a break and then a short lecture. I might be able to finish this before. See how you guys are holding up. So vagus. Again, all the different ganglia of vagus do not have a name. Preganglionic neuron is in the medulla. Very long preganglionic neuron. And it's myelinated. All of these have been myelinated. Let's not go, we'll just stop at the heart, okay? So we'll take it to the heart. So the postganglionic neuron is very short, micrometers long. The ganglia is in the organ itself. And so these are all described as intramural, meaning within the wall. Again, neurotransmitter from preganglionic, neurotransmitter from postganglionic, are both acetylcholine. So if we open up somebody's chest, or if we open up a frog and take its heart out and drip acetylcholine on the surface of the heart, you're going to see the heart contractions decrease in rate, fewer heart contractions per minute. The vagus nerve leaves the jugular foramen, and as we've already learned, sends regular general somatic efferent neurons to laryngeal muscles and swallowing muscles, the esophagus. When it gets into the thoracic cavity, these structures on the side are sympathetic that we'll talk about tomorrow, and here's the vagus nerve. Remember, part of it goes back up to the larynx, and the rest forms multiple branches and follows the airways into the lungs, where they cause an increase in mucus secretions. They cause a constriction in the diameter of the airway, so it makes it more difficult for air to move in and out of the lungs. And then on the esophagus, instead of having two separate cranial nerves, they form a bundle called vagal trunks, and they kind of rotate around. So instead of running side by side, we have a vagal trunk down the front, and one down the back. And they follow the esophagus into the thoracic cavity. All right? I'm going to go forward, close your eyes a bit because I'm going to swing forward to sympathetic. I'll just do it this way, I'll do it a little faster. And inside the abdominal cavity, these are all sympathetic structures that we'll be talking about tomorrow. Here's the aorta. The vagus nerve follows the esophagus right here into the abdominal cavity, and then they will follow the branches of the aorta to their organ, along with the sympathetic nerves. So at that point, you won't be able to tell when it goes into the organ whether it's a sympathetic or a parasympathetic fiber. It's all mixed up with the sympathetics. Still preganglionic, okay? Because it doesn't form a synapse until it's actually in the wall of the organ. At that point, sympathetic will be postganglionic. So we're going to have preganglionic sympathetics and postganglionic sympathetics going together into the organ itself. And this is what we call dual innervation. An organ gets both. And its activity depends on which one happens to be dominant at any given time. So remember, parasympathetic was craniosacral. So we're going to end up looking at the parasympathetic by looking at the sacral nerves right here. This is from Netter's. I think I have it opened up there. So let me explain what you're looking at. Pelvic cavity, sagittal view, left side of the pelvis. All right, cut through the sacrum. This would be the true rim of the pelvis. All right, the arcuate line, iliopectineal line coming around, pubic symphysis right here. Passing through the anterior sacral foramina are the ventral rami of the second, third, fourth, fifth sacral nerves. First one too, but mostly second, third, fourth, and fifth. A little bit of first right there. So these are the ventral rami. They're coming together and forming the largest nerve, which is the sciatic nerve, which is going to go down the posterior aspect of the thigh. Coming out of the spinal cord with these ventral rami are preganglionic sympathetic fibers. But they don't go into the lower limb. We have no parasympathetic fibers in our limbs. Okay? They will leave the ventral rami, and that's what these are doing right here. They're leaving the ventral rami, coming into the pelvis, forming what I call a rat's nest, with descending sympathetic, and then they will go into the uterus, they will go into the bladder, they will go into the rectum, they will go up to the descending colon. So these are the parasympathetic component of the pelvic component of the parasympathetic nervous system. I'm going to leave that on the screen and diagram a spinal cord to show you how that works.